Hello and welcome to a very special, slightly different start to the Friday stream because, and it's in the background here, look, this is it. Factorio devs, Clone and Coverix and V have posted a new Friday Facts. Friday Facts 367. And it's got some information about the update. I might as well read it through now and give some thoughts if I've got any. Not sure I'll have a lot. Just to go through it all and sort of see what they've said. Obviously starts off with a bit of a sort of an apology. Hello, long time no talk. We've got some catching up to do. Indeed, it's been about a year, almost 1 year. Friday Facts 365. We said we don't think that the expansion will take less than a year to develop. Well, it has been less than a year and is not finished, so we kept our word on that. Anyone who was expecting it within a year was probably a bit misguided, I think. You know, the game took 9 years in early access before it was released, so I don't think we'll be getting it. Well, we'll come on to that in a minute, but I think I think it's going to be another year away. But while it might not be finished, there is still a lot we have done so far. Expansion news. So we still don't want to be specific about many things, not even the expansion name, but we can start by giving you some general idea about the scale of the project. The general goal is to make the expansion feel like as big an addition as the whole vanilla game. This is why we plan to price it at $30 and put enough content to make it well worth the price. Now, typically, the main vanilla game takes about somewhere in a region, depending on how experienced you are, somewhere around 60 hours, I would say. That's if you know sort of what you're doing, but you're, new to the game, so a newish player. But a lot of people, it takes 500 hours for their first launch. Now, I don't think they're referring to that. I think, as I say, they're talking about an expansion that will take somewhere in the region of 100 hours, maybe, if you sort of have a couple of attempts at it and you don't quite know what you're doing with the new stuff. Honestly, making the price, and thus the expected scope, a little bit more concrete in this way motivates us not only to make enough, but also to not overshoot, which is one of the things they were a bit chronic for last time, in that we got quite a few things added in during early access that I'm not sure are really going to have in the original plan. So it sounds like they're trying to be a bit more, they're trying to avoid feature creep and scope creep by the sound of things, which is good. So we wouldn't spend another 9 years doing it. There you go. You see, it took 9 years for the first early access version to hit 1.0. Generally, the fact that the team size has increased, and there are a lot of things in the engine that we already solved, should hopefully imply that the expansion takes way less time than the base game. So what they're basically saying is that they've got that concrete foundation of the base vanilla game. This also kind of confirms that the vanilla game isn't going to change. So, as I say, it's also confirmed later on. So basically, you could play through the entire vanilla game without any real changes once the expansion has launched. So it really is an expansion. It's not doesn't sound like they're going to tweak the vanilla version too much, basically. So that's quite interesting. And because that also suggests what it might be about, you see. And as I say, I think the feeling in the community is it's probably space expansion as an official version rather than a mod. 7-step plan. Always good to have a plan. Step 1, high-level plan. We decided and planned the general topics of the expansion. This is, and notes the past tense there, this is comparable to when we were deciding to add trains to the game. And he's using this as an example. I don't think this is equivalent to what we're getting. But yeah, so when they decided to add trains to the game, we knew that we wanted to control how the intersections work and that it should act as the largest scale logistics option, but the details weren't laid out yet. So really is a high-level plan of just, we want trains in the game, we want you to be able to do signals, basically. Step 2, basic shape. This is the step where we start to make the actual game objects, even when they don't even do anything at that point. So this is, I believe, they're referring to what you call grey box objects in the game, where they're just placeholder graphics and they're just things, entities, that logic can be attached to for you in order to basically be able to play it very roughly. For the rail example, this would mean that we make mock objects for rails, trains, train stops, and signals. So different people can start implementing the behavior in parallel. So basically, one developer might, do the logic for rails, another might do the logic for trains, another might do the train stops, and maybe the signals as well, or both of them. You might have multiple developers working on those in parallel. That's pretty common for modern software development. And start making it interact as they go. So deciding a common architecture and sort of systems, which of course is kind of taken care of with the base game. So the types of changes that they would need to do would be modifications rather than discovering that the base game doesn't work properly because it's been pretty well tested by now. As things stop being as abstract, a lot of the most basic unexpected problems start to show. So this is basically saying you wanted to do signals and you had an initial thought that that's how you were going to do them. You try them and they don't work properly. Trains crash into each other or no train moves and those sorts of things. So that's the most basic unexpected problems because your plan didn't work. Step 3, implementation of subsystems. The goal of this part is to give the individual mechanics and their object definitions into place, but they are usually the minimum necessary to test it. It's like implementing biter and spawner mechanics, but having just one type of biter, not connecting it to pollution, and having no sense of balancing with the player's weapon system. So it's just literally some logic for biters that spawns them and creates a biter object that could be represented by a grey square. And a bigger grey square. You know, it has no real representation of how it will look, but it allows you to test behaviours. So does it spawn? How many does it spawn? Can you get it to spawn different numbers? Does it spawn in different locations? When it adds a biter nest onto the map, does it put it in the water? Or, you know, all these logical tests that you need to do, basically. Step 4, connecting systems into a prototype. Here, we put all the subsystems together and try to connect them. A lot of bigger structural problems can be discovered at this point, which might require some wild removals, changes or additions required to make it all work together. So you basically put all of your bits together, all of your Lego pieces together, you discover that they don't fit properly, and one of them sticks out, and another one causes the entire Lego set to explode, and you know, all of your interaction problems start to appear in that phase. And this is the key bit. So they say this is where we are now in the expansion progress. Big parts of the game are playable, and we are approaching a state where we can playtest from start to finish. So that sounds like they've got quite a long way. However, there's something called Pareto's principle. It's last 10% of the progress takes 90% of the effort, and that's what you tend to find with a lot of these things. It's relatively simple. It's not simple, but it's relatively simple to throw things together and create systems and subsystems and put them all into a big pot and sort of stir them together. What you then discover, as I say, is they don't work together properly, they don't work as intended, there's all sorts of bugs, there's all sorts of weird interactions, there's all sorts of broken bits, and all of that is the next phase, the first pass of tweaking. This part should feel much better as the content is more stable and the chance of removing things is lower. So in step 4, they might discover, well, you know, signals don't work at all and are just a bad idea and are just horrible, so they take them out altogether. That's a fairly extreme example, but they might also discover that they don't work properly and they need to go completely back to the drawing board and redo them. The next step, this step 5, is once they've basically got those basic versions in place, they then do testing and they check to see if it works. Can we test this? Does it work? Does it function? Does it function as intended? This is where we can actually have the semi-final list of requirements for the graphics department. So at this stage, it's all been grey box, you know, so the graphics haven't really been properly implemented because they've not decided. There's no point creating a new graphical entity if you then decided you're just going to ditch it, or it doesn't need to work like that, or it doesn't need to look like that. So this is where the graphics department get involved and the grey boxes start to become actual graphics and entities, which allows us to start making reasonable time estimates. At this point, we do more playtesting and we can start polishing the roughest edges. This polishing is mainly focused on basic balancing. The biggest UX issues, UX stands for user experience, so how does it feel to do? How does it feel to play, and to interact with it? Broad pacing improvements, etc. When I come back to the parallel of the train implementation, this is the phase where the trains are fully functional, but it's cumbersome to control them, so we need to improve the way rails are built, provide the train's overview, improve the schedule editing, etc. So this is, it's polishing. It's basically taking, right, we've got functional trains, but, as he says, if you get in it and try and drive in it, the controls are stupid and it doesn't speed up very well, and all these sorts of issues that you'd say, well, we need to make it feel better and to play better, basically. This is kind of a loop where we implement additional things based on the feedback from the previous loop of playtesting. This step is also waiting on graphics, and we have also learned that UX improvements are not easy, so it will take a long time. So basically, this is what I was saying about the Pareto's principle, that you might think they've got a rough version. So somewhere between these two would be the equivalent of the original early access version. You know, it's functional and it's got big bits of the game in. The difference would be that they hadn't done these things. They knew the types. They'd done this, but they haven't put everything in a basic shape on the early access version. And I'll come on to that in a minute. But basically what he's saying is that they want it to be essentially a complete, the complete set of features. Maybe it'll change. Maybe they'll need to add something. Maybe they'll suddenly discover something that goes in, which I think is good, given where the game is overall. Step 6 beta test. At this point, most of the graphics are in place and the game is fully playable. When the game feels close to finished, we can tweak the final details, like new simulation screens, tips and tricks, achievements, and so on. Note the achievements there, so we're getting new achievements for the expansion, which you usually do, but that's quite interesting. We can also start to invite a limited number of players to help us find the most obvious bugs. So this would be like a proper closed beta test. A lot of companies use beta tests basically as promotional activities nowadays, but that sounds like a proper beta test. It doesn't work properly, and they know it doesn't, and there's no expectation that it will. We want to also invite some of the mod makers to help us test the modding API and let them prepare for the release. One of the best things I would say about Factorio is its support for modding and their general attitude to modding. Same goes for our top community translators, proofreaders on crowding. Step 7, release. The tricky part is that we want to release basically direct to stable without an experimental phase, like when we released 1.0. The reason is the obvious problem we would have otherwise. An experimental release is not interesting to many people, but by the time it becomes officially stable, it is old news and nobody cares. Hopefully, the focus on automated tests and beta testing should make it smooth enough. This sounds like, to some extent, lessons learned from the original Factorio release. What they're kind of saying is a lot of people don't play early access games. They won't play them. And there is that thing. It's almost like a form of, and this is a valid opinion, it's not one I fully agree with for indie games, but there's that thing of if it's being released in an early access version and you're paying for it, you're effectively paying to do beta testing. There is and not unreasonable, I would say, but an attitude that, don't pay for games before they're released and that sort of thing. But for me, it's different for indie games. I don't believe in that philosophy. I mean, don't get me wrong, it does lead into, you can get abandonware and all those sorts of things, where the devs just give up because it's not been popular. So there are risks, and if you have any doubt, don't do early access. But I'm more than happy to do it. I've more than enough disposable income and more than enough stupidity, so it's something I'm more than happy to do. But I fully appreciate the risks, basically. But what it's basically saying is that it comes out, particularly with Factorio, it was like an extreme example where it came out early access, and it was in early access for, I'm not sure it was the 9 years, it was like 8 years, I think, and it was like a year and a half before it was even on Steam. Something like that. I don't know the exact timetable, but it meant that a lot of us had played it through over and over and over again. That does tend to mean that you sort of get into this situation where, and I know I felt it, they make changes, and this is what he's talking about, UX experiences. They make changes and the community reacts negatively to them. I think they learned this lesson from the original release, basically, that if you put it out and it's there for years and years and years in early access, basically some people will forget about it, or, and then when you try and do your big launch, it's like that thing, basically there's I can't remember what the exact expression is, but it's, you only get one launch, basically. It's not quite true. There are lots of games that have come back and successful, like Rainbow Six Siege and all these sorts of things, but yeah, it's sort of like, I think they're trying to go for an approach that is, right, this is it, it's done. Maybe there's a day one patch and a month one patch and those sort of things, but it's a finished, complete product. And I say partly as a reaction to what happened with, Factorio's very long development. Release strategy. The original plan of just releasing the expansion as a big update sounded very natural. We imagined that 1.1 would basically become completely stable and we wouldn't have to worry about it and just focus on the new versions. However, this proved to not actually be possible, and maintaining both versions is just more work. On top of that, the huge refactors we made at our current master branch made the process of merging fixes and changes into 1.1 quite painful. Also, if we wanted to change anything structural, we would have to keep the migrations from 1.1 forever, and we would also need to support the 1.1 map version loading indefinitely. So, there's a little bit to unpack there. What they're basically saying is that the expansion is a different branch of the game. So the game we're all playing is 1.1, and the expansion is being developed in a... I don't think they call it a 1.2 there, but in a 1.2. Basically, it's probably not called 1.2, it'll be 1.1 expansion. But they basically, all the refactoring thing they were talking about that, which came out of that controversial update, all of that stuff is clearly in the branch, in the expansion version. It's not actually been put into the main game, which makes sense because there's not been a big patch saying we've completely reworked these things, which you would expect given what they were saying in that update, that Friday Facts. So what they're going to do is they're basically going to take those core game changes and put them into a 1.2 version, and that'll mean that when they do the expansion, all of that core stuff will be the same. Because, say, in terms of the development side of it, as in the core stuff, that's kind of... they've done a lot of that by the sound of things. It's the next bit where they turn it into a fun game with good graphics and you know, all of that stuff. And that's going to take a while. That always takes a while. The other thing is this bit, we would also need to support the 1.1 map version loading indefinitely. So basically, they've got a new way of loading in the map by the sound of things. Now, given if you've ever played on a really big map, it takes ages to load the map in, and it's really big. So it sounds like they've redone that. This leads to a different plan. We will release the 1.2 update to the base game, and the expansion will be based on the same version, and we will also contain the expansion mod. The executables will be slightly different, so you couldn't just install the expansion mod without having the expansion executable, but other than that, the code will be identical. So in other words, if somebody like rips off the expansion and turns it into a mod for the base version, it wouldn't work, basically, is what they're saying. This has some very nice implications. The expansion content will be just a mod that can actually turn off, so you can easily play a non-expansion playthrough if you want to. And to say that again tells us as well that the expansion stuff is completely independent. So if they add in, well, I suppose it could still work, but if what I was thinking is maybe there'd be new minerals, so we might get, it probably wouldn't be like aluminium, but you know, if we got new minerals or new ores and stuff, that would be limited to the new items that got put in the game, is what I'm reading that to mean. It could be that you still needed them for the old stuff, so perhaps nuclear reactors needed some new super special mineral to make, and that it's just like a toggle that when you turn on the expansion, it requires it. When you turn it off, it doesn't require it. Could be that. I doubt that though, because your production chains would all be different. So what I'm interpreting that to mean is that if there are new machines, new entities, new items in the game, those would either use the existing materials, or if there are new materials in the game, new ores, they will be limited to the expansion stuff. So that's my rather heavy reading into, I'm sort of massively reading between the lines there. Since the versions are compatible, the expansion version can connect to non-expansion multiplayer games by disabling the expansion mod. That's even more interesting in that that tends to suggest expansion can connect to non-expansion multiplayer games. Yeah, so basically it sounds like if you turn off the expansion, all of the old stuff just works. So, you know, the new stuff is the new stuff, and it's separate completely to the old stuff and doesn't, in a sense, interact with it. I can't quite believe that. I can't believe we're not getting, you know, level 5 modules or, you know, things like that. That sounds like things we'll get, but it sounds like that they will be proper additions to the game. All the changes to the game, modding and scripting API, etc. will be done just once, so we don't have to keep two versions of Lua docs, for example. Just a housekeeping one. Lots of the quality of life and other improvements we prepared for the expansion will just appear for everyone. So the expansion will be more strictly about the new content and mechanics. So this is almost like one of those when you get one of those free updates. I'm wondering, it's just interesting they refer to quality of life stuff, not just performance stuff. So it sounds like maybe, I don't know, something like blueprints might have been tweaked or something like that. To be clear, the expansion will not be just a mod. The game engine itself will have some significant improvements and technical backing to make many of the new gameplay features possible. These engine capabilities will be available with the expansion build executable, and we will add a mod info flag like uses expansion pass features. That will mean the mod will only try to load in the expansion, and this will also be used for other things such as mod portal filtering. Sounds like the expansion will work fully and completely with the old version, but the old version will be, one entity. The expansion stuff will be another set of, another entity, another thing. The two will interact, but in such a way that if you're just playing vanilla, you won't miss anything in the expansion. Graphics department. The requirements on Factorio graphics are often heavily rooted in the behaviour and mechanics of entities. When the gameplay is just getting designed and tested, as we outlined in the plan above, changes and even removals are common. To avoid reworking or scrapping graphics, which take a lot of time and care to create, we try to work on things with the most solidified gameplay mechanics first, or improvements that don't change the mechanics at all. Now, this isn't how biters die, is it? I'm sort of... because I don't tend to sit there and watch them decay. Not die, decay, basically. I don't think they do this at the moment. So what they're saying, I think, unless I'm very wrong, is this is new graphics. This is... so when he talks about improvements that don't change the mechanics at all, this is improved graphics. I say, I may be misinterpreting that, but these carcasses are new. I think this is what essentially the graphics team has been working on while they wait for the mechanical changes to be done. So, for example, if they're at this stage, this is where they bring in graphics, basically. So yeah, and I think these are new. They're quite gross, I would say. There's a lot of organs and stuff. If you look at this one, oh, you can't see my mouse, can you? But if you look at the biters, particularly underneath the left-hand nest, this one here, there's a lot of organs and stuff in this. Look at that. In this thing. It's all a bit horrible and gross, which is good because, that's what you want the aliens to be, I think. But yeah, and there's structural pieces, almost like skeleton stuff in the nests. I think these are new graphics, basically. But of course, it doesn't change the game by having these. But yeah, very organic looking. Anyway, now the next bit, the big reveal, or concept art of new stuff. So, this appears to be... oh, I just finished that. We hope you enjoyed the small update and can let us know what you think at the usual places. Yeah, so this appears to be... in fact, I'll make that a little bit smaller if I can, so it fits on the screen. Appears to be, unless I'm being very much stupid, a new biter. And it's not a biter. It's a what? I mean, that looks like a brain to me. Yeah, so at the top here, I can zoom in on it, but it doesn't make a lot of difference for you guys because I just have to zoom out in order to see it, sort of thing. So it is a big image then. Yeah, so at the top here, basically it's some kind of jellyfish, I would say. It's modelled on a jellyfish, particularly possibly a man-o'-war, Portuguese man-o'-war. I don't know if that's the official name for them or not, so it may not. I don't know what that is. But basically, man-o'-war's like the purple one, the big purple floating thing on top, and then it has really, really, really long tentacles. And it's basically fatal for humans if you get stung. Or I think it is. That may be a myth. But yeah, so we got a jellyfish, I would say, idea. It's clearly a flying enemy. So is that a more wider hint that we're going to get flying biters? Possibly. But I would say from the fact that this has a big brain in it, right? I would say these things down the bottom are probably meant to be sensor organs, some kind of sensors. We've got a ring here that I would say is equivalent of an eye, possibly a visual sensor. These are perhaps touch, taste type sensors, smell type sensors. Obviously we've got tentacles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think there's 6 tentacles, so that's interesting. And then we've got these grabbing, clawy, hook type talons on it. So it looks like it will have some kind of offensive capability. It will be a dangerous entity. But to me, with this being a big brain, now it could just be it's because that's gross and that would be fine. But I'm wondering if this is perhaps a queen biter, maybe something along those lines, or perhaps maybe something like in Warhammer where Warhammer 40k, where the what they call Tyranids, they have the larger Tyranids that effectively act as control entities for the smaller, the Griblies. So I'm wondering maybe it's something like that. The fact it's a big brain could maybe, I mean, if we're going nuts, it might be some kind of psychic effect, or it could just be equivalent of a psychic power, and it has maybe a laser blast. It could do like a brain blast, where it's like a laser beam almost. So equivalent of the laser turrets maybe. Or it could do something to the player, disorientate you, something like that. I hope not, to be honest, with that one. That seems a bit... I say, the fact it's a big brain suggests it's intelligent in some way. So it could be a control entity, it could be the Queen Biter, or King Biter, I guess. But yeah, very interesting. These, I think, are basically... So this is like propulsion jets, I think. This is basically saying how it gets around, is by sort of pushing itself around with gas jets, basically. Of course, it's a concept art, so it may never even reach the game. But if they say they've already done a lot of the coding, it suggests they've put this entity in some form into the game. Obviously, with it being a flying biter, that's a lot of people have requested things like that, so that they can fly over your walls and attack your base, and you've got to defend your base properly, not just have a big wall, or at least you need some kind of aerial defense, anti-air guns or something like that. If it can fly, can it also cross water? Can it fly across water and attack us from that direction? But of course, it could just be it could just be it flies, but it's not really. It's not a new enemy type, other than, as I say, if it's, say, a big, mother biter, as it were, then you've got, one or two of them in the game, and they're just hovering there, great big blob that you've got to kill. It does beg the question, if it is that, what effect would that have? If you killed one, does it stop the biters from attacking you or something? The other option is it's just a new type of biter, and it's just a different biter that they can spawn, and just attacks by air. It's horrible, I would say. It's really gross, which is good. But say you got all these nasty claws, so it could be another like melee attack. It floats up to you and grabs you. It's interesting that that's what they've chosen to show anyway. Yeah, I mean, my speculation for it is pretty much, I think, in line with most people's, that it is a space type expansion. I mean, these would work well in space, wouldn't they? I mean, jet-propelled biter, you could imagine it floating along in space. But yeah, I think it is most because it's the most logical thing. At the end of Factorio, you launch a rocket, so the notion of at least going to another planet, or going to a moon, or going to an orbital platform, or asteroid belt, another star, all of those things make complete sense, given the goal of the game is to launch a rocket. This is always one of the things I've said about Factorio. You launch a rocket, the game tells you at the start you've crash landed and you need to get home. You launch a rocket, you can get on. I think you can get on that record. I can never remember, but you send this rocket off, and what does that do exactly? All right, it's got a satellite in it, but what does that achieve? It doesn't really do anything for you, other than give you space science, which is just a way of continuing the game. $30 is something. Yeah, it is quite a price. I mean, for me personally, and I do appreciate a lot of people have different circumstances. To me, this is basically ridiculously cheap, in a sense that, I mean, I've literally played the game for, I've forgotten, it's 3,000 hours. So the fact that I've only paid a tiny amount of money, and I do know a lot of people, people's circumstances are different. That is a lot of money for a lot of people. But that to me is cheap, particularly if they're saying what they're saying about it being the same size as vanilla and as complex as vanilla, which is quite a claim. I'm not sure they'll achieve that in the timescales they're talking about, because they added nuclear to vanilla, and they added so much stuff to vanilla. To say it's going to be the same again and it's only going to take a little bit of extra time, maybe not. But yeah, to me, and I'm assuming what will happen is, because I think the base game is $30, isn't it? So it'll probably be like, if you buy the complete game, it'll be $50. But for those of us who buy it as an expansion, it'll be $30. But yeah, really strategy is interesting. $30 is quite a lot for it's a lot for an expansion, that for a game that only costs that in the first place. You know, it's equivalent of, say, you release a $60 game, and then your first expansion is a $60 expansion. Proportionally, is quite heavy. You would typically expect expansions to be less, but then, in my personal opinion, it's underpriced. The main game. Again, I fully appreciate I'm coming at it from a particular perspective, and a lot of people don't have that sort of money. But for me, from a value point of view, you know, I've literally paid fractions of a penny per hour of gameplay. It doesn't seem right that's, you know, I can't play a bit more. I already got the soundtrack, which is another thing. I don't know if we're going to get more songs, more tracks for the expansion, but I'd certainly welcome a few more. I'm a really big fan of the soundtrack. I'm assuming, as I say, this will be a closed beta. Whether and who would get to partake in the beta is sort of an interesting question. The implication is they're expecting some players to be involved. I suspect it'll probably be the more active and more involved mod developers, not mods. You know, we'll get to have a go on it and break it, basically. Probably because what will happen is they'll delve into the code and sort of say, well, this is broken and that sort of stuff, and here's how you fix it. Well, that was my thoughts on it, basically. I say I'm really pleased that they have given us some news. It had gone really quiet, like it's almost scarily quiet, particularly given that Friday Facts 365 is basically a run of 365 weeks of them putting out, you know, updates on the game and the state of the game. So to go a complete year with total silence was getting a bit worrying, actually. I kind of didn't doubt that it would happen, but there's always that possibility that they suddenly go, actually, no, we're not doing this, we're doing Factorio 2 or something like that, which wouldn't have any problems with any of that, but a bit of a long time to go with no news whatsoever. Whether we'll get regular updates now, I don't know.